Okay, listen. If you guys remember from last class period, we were talking about, hey guys, we're starting, okay? So if you guys remember from last class period, we talked about movement west, right? We're going to be going west to the Homestead Act. Guys, through the Homestead Act, Transcontinental Railroad, things like that. And we're going to begin to move west, really help industrialize and develop this western United States. However, this unfortunately is going to cause a major conflict with a group of people. Who do you think those people are?
Native Americans.
Native Americans, right? Great continuity in American history is conflict with Native Americans. And this one's going to be like the big one, the ending one of this whole situation. Now, this area of the United States is what is called the Great Plains. If you want to put next to it with the Great Plains, I would put down next to it Tornado Alley. Tornado Alley. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I was really, and still am, into tornadoes. Mostly because of the movie Twister. Great movie. PG-13. Ask your parents' permission.
Also the game Twister.
Also the game Twister. I haven't played that. Oh, well, that's a different game. Okay, now listen. Now, if you don't know, in the summertime, that's going to be the most popular time when tornadoes are going to happen. Almost all the tornadoes in the United States, especially the most destructive ones, are along these Great Plains because everything's flat. That's why it was so weird when we had a tornado here, is because we have mountains and it's almost impossible to create a tornado with mountains, but hey, Salt Lake City did it. And so what happened is that this area right here is going to be the Great Plains, and on the Great Plains, we have a specific group of people called the Great Plains Indians, otherwise known as just the Plains Indians. Now, these Plains Indians are going to especially rely on the horse. Most of this is going to be for hunting and things like that. One other thing, too, is going to be warfare, and this is what is known as the counting coup. So basically what happens is during warfare, and you can see it in this cave drawing right here, you have these sticks. And what happens with these sticks is basically it becomes kind of like a totem pole of warfare. So as you go along, your goal is to basically get somebody off of their horse. That means that you have defeated them. And what happens is when somebody falls off of their horse, you touch them with your counting coup, which you can see right here. That means you have defeated that person. That person on the ground then has to give you like a feather, a bone from one of their necklaces, something to kind of show that they were defeated. It's an honor thing. And then you put it onto your counting coup, kind of like a giant thing of trinkets, basically, of your warfare. Now, one part of the Plains Indians, though, which is probably the most famous part of it, but not the biggest, has to do with scalping. The same exact circumstance would happen with scalping, except this time when you fall on the ground, your scalp gets taken. Very small amounts of the population, but that's what they would actually wrap instead of sinew, which is bison tendon. They would instead wrap it with your scalp and then hang it off the end. Very small amount, but I always get asked about scalping, so there's your little scalping thing.
So it's like a tag.
I would say that it is not tag.
It's like a more violent.
It's an extremely violent version of killing somebody. Okay?
Oh, like, I mean, you
Yes.
get them off their horse and then you tag them and
Okay. Now, the one very important thing about the Plains Indians, and if you will highlight it in the second bullet, is the word buffalo. And also, with this buffalo, if you will also do me a favor and put a bunch of little stars around it, there is an entire key concept about buffalo, okay? And about the bison of the United States, American bison, not the Asian bison, okay? Now, buffalo for the natives were very important. First, it was their major food source, an extremely major food source. The other thing is that natives believed that you should not just use this just for food. You have to use every single part of the bison. So, for example, they would use the horns as scoops and as bowls. They would use the skull in different religious practices. They would use the hide for multiple different things. Every single part of the bison gets used. So your entire life really revolves around this one thing. Jacob, it's way too early for you to fall asleep. You got to wait at least 30 minutes. The meat also became important. They would create a thing called pemmican, which is basically an extremely salted jerky because it lasts a lot longer than a traditional jerky that you have. The men of the tribe were typically the warriors, but this was one thing that was unique. The women were actually the leaders. Oftentimes, when the men go out and hunt, the women would actually become the major leaders. One other thing that's very important that you need to put in the margins is religion. Or actually, I just realized it's also in the fourth bullet, so you can just highlight the word religion. Their lives revolved around religion, especially with nature. This is where the medicine men are going to come in as well. If you are a boy at the age of 12 and you want to become a man, you go out you're brought to the middle of the land. You're put into this medicinal hut right here with no food or water. As you go on, without food or water, you begin to hallucinate as you begin to have that lack of nutrition. When you hallucinate, you then hallucinate with the ancestors. They teach you your life skills. You come out of it as a man, and you have to walk back to your tribe, which is typically about 30 miles. And you are now a man. It's like a 30-day process. Now, this was really important. It kind of shows the importance of religion. Also notice down here, what is this? Buffalo skull or bison skull. Yeah, exactly. Now, what happens is as we begin to come west, we begin to have conflict over land. Everything in this colored area, except for the red, is going to be land taken between the year 1860 and 1890. So think about all this other land that's about to be taken. Now, when we start this conflict over this area known as the Indian Wars, this is your next page, so you have to actually flip the page over. Don't strain your wrist. No. This is the PE portion of the class. Now, what we're going to be talking about is these Indian Wars. And if you want to put next to the Indian Wars, this is going to be the last major conflict with Native Americans. They come up again in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, but this is really the last huge violent conflict that's going to happen with the Native tribes. Now, when we contextualize this of why was this happening, if you will highlight where it says government seeing these tribes as foreign independent nations. So previously in the 1700s and the 1800s, as they put people on reservations, they declared that those reservations are now independent nations. Why that is important? An independent nation, if you attack them, you're just attacking somebody else, right? It's not like you're attacking Salt Lake City or whatever it could possibly be. By making them foreign independent nations, it takes away that responsibility of not injuring them, not hurting them, not being bad to them, because they're not part of America, right? They're just some other country that we're at war with. Now, the second thing is this major continuity, and we've talked about it before. This is the continuity, if you will highlight, where it says land-grabbing white settlers. As the United States begins to move west and land conflicts begin to occur, we start to have conflict over this land. Whose land is what? So let's remember the Homestead Act. You guys remember the Sooners? Guys go out, plant the flag, they get all the land. Whose land was that? The Native Americans. Who is going to get that land? The white settlers. Are the natives going to get anything?
Probably not.
No, probably not. Okay? So what happens is these conflicts occur. Do you guys remember the Trail of Tears?
Yes.
Right? In Georgia, they want to kick him out. They kick him out to where did they go at the end of the Trail of Tears? Oklahoma. Okay? So they've kicked them out because they wanted that land in Georgia. So this is a major continuity during this time for like a CCOTSA or contextualization. One thing that's different about this compared to other ones, if you will highlight the word military. Now the U.S. government is going to send the U.S. Army and the U.S. military to go and fight these natives who are going to fight back against the white settlers who are moving west. And then if you will also highlight in the next bullet, this is just reminding you, it's all about disputes over land territory. Disputes over land territory. So what's going to happen is they begin to move west and we begin this conflict. Now this is going to be the general in charge of all of this. I want you to read this statement. It says, I want no peace till the Indians suffer more. Do you guys see what that kind of says about this conflict? It's not just about fighting over this land. It's a suffering, right? It's a racism thing. It's the idea of one better than the other. So what's going to happen is that in the Dakotas, is the Sioux tribe. All this land is their designated reservation by the U.S. government. Well, what happens is as westward migration begins to increase, what's going to occur is that basically this trail right here, called the Bozeman Trail, gets created. What's the problem? Whose land is that going into? The Sioux, the Native Americans, right? However, the natives say, no worries, we have a treaty. They're not allowed to come in here. This is our nation, our independent nation. They can't come in here.
Without a passport.
Well, you don't need a passport to go on a reservation.
Oh, well. Build a wall.
No, that's not also what's going to happen. They are, so this is where it gets super tricky, and it is a bit difficult. So, as a Native American, you do not need a passport. Nowadays, you are declared a U.S. citizen. Back then, you were not declared a U.S. citizen. Citizenship comes, I believe, in the 1920s. So they are considered U.S. citizens. They don't need a passport to go back and forth. However, prior to this time, they weren't declared citizens before 1920-ish. And so what happened is that you didn't get the benefits of citizenship. So you couldn't vote, and that was one of the big things that's going to happen. Yeah. So what happens is they contacted the U.S. government. They said, we need Army to protect us. We need to kick these people out of this trail. The U.S. Army shows up, and they're going to line the trails, but they are not going to protect the native tribe. Who are they going to protect instead?
The white people.
The white settlers, yeah. So what happens is that they line this road, and basically as the white settlers come, and the natives begin to try to cross this line or stop them, they're told, no, you must protect this, and you have to allow these white settlers. Was this a violation of their treaty? Oh yeah. Completely violated their treaty. America doesn't really care. Now, as time goes on, this guy named Crazy Horse, you might have heard it before, he has a monument being built about him. Crazy Horse decides something must be done. Captain Federman is going to be leading this army that's going to be going through, and one day, this road goes through a canyon. So, Federman's men are going through this canyon. At the top of the canyon are waiting Native Americans. When the timing is just right, they begin to rain down ammunition and bows and arrows down onto them. It's called the Federman Massacre. And they kill all of Federman's name. Now, they said that this was because they were defending their land. You weren't supposed to be there anyways. American government sees you've now attacked our army. That's an act of war. And it begins the U.S. Indian Wars. Now, what happens is that this treaty is going to be signed called the Treaty of Fort Laramie. And they decide all of this right here is going to be now your reservation. It's only about a third of their original reservation size. Now that this is your reservation, we promise this time we won't enter it. We promise. We're not going to go into it all. Well, unfortunately, a couple years later, some backpacking horsemen are going through the Black Hills. They stop overnight. They dig a hole in their little campground. They find gold. Very small amount of gold. Only about this much gold. They find gold. They start to write letters. Those letters become more popular. It goes to the U.S. president. The U.S. president is told that this group had seen thousands of pounds of gold in the Black Hills. It's not what they really saw, but that's what the president's told. He goes and publishes a newspaper article saying that the Black Hills has thousands of pounds of gold, and now what's going to happen? Everyone's going to rush in, and basically these lines are going to completely become dissolved. Okay? Now, let's talk about the buffalo. Remember, how important is the buffalo?
Very important.
Very important. Most important. Well, here's what's going to happen. Now it's going to be a physical warfare as well. If you kill their major food source, who will you also kill in that same aspect? The natives, right? It's like if somebody went and burned down all of our crop fields, we'd all start to starve and die. Now what happens is that as the transcontinental railroad or railroads begin to go across, you have to realize that the buffalo were not really scared of guns. If anybody's ever been to Alaska and been to the national parks up there, grizzly bears don't care if you exist. I mean, they'll walk right by you. They don't care because they have nothing to fear. They've never experienced being shot at or being killed. They just hang out. So the buffalo hang out too. Trains come along. Why is there a need to fear them? Move out of the way. And they're just sitting there grazing along the trains. Well, when the trains come by with all their passengers, they slow down right when they get to the buffalo. And then everybody pulls out their guns. They point them out the windows, and they begin to shoot all the buffalo in the west. Now, this is just for fun. It was a fun thing to do. I mean, that's why some people will just go out and they'll shoot squirrels and stuff. It's just for fun. Unfortunately, in this case, this fun is not just going to be like somebody going out and shooting a squirrel in their backyard. Instead, what happens is there begins to become a massive level of extinction of this buffalo. What happens is people, there's no limits. So like in today's world, if you want to go fishing, you can only fish 6 fish a day. I don't know if you guys know that. So if you went and fished like 20 fish, you might want to reconsider that because it's against the law. What happens is that instead of just fishing, let's say 1 over, so I caught 7 fish instead of 6, we're talking hundreds of buffalo that you're killing every single day. To the point where this next picture I'm going to show you, 5-man hunting group went out for 10 days. This is their result. This is right here. About 700 buffalo skulls are going to be killed in 10 days by 5 people. This becomes the sport. And what happens is that people aren't doing it just for the meat. So if you say, oh, well, they're just getting meat for their families, right? That's not how it works. What would happen is that they would kill the buffalo. They would then skin the buffalo, take the hide, usually to put up in their house or to sell, and the carcasses get left. Now remember, Native Americans believed every single part of the buffalo should be used. So now you're attacking them spiritually. And all across the West, which you can see right here, you can see carcass, 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 carcass. All you're seeing is these dead bison being left to rot. Now, if we talk about the decimation of the buffalo population, at the start of the Indian Wars, there's about 20 million buffalo in the United States. By the year 1900, about 30 years later, we're down to about 10,000 buffalo. And by 1920, that population dwindles to about 500 in the United States. That's how massively they declined because of this. Now, we do have some good news. There was a location in the 1990s that was designated to restart the buffalo population. Does anybody know where that is? Just shout it out.
Antelope Island.
That was the first class to ever say that one first. There's a bigger place.
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone. We'll get to Antelope Island in a second. So, Yellowstone was really the place that they said we're going to redwindle this. When in the 90s they reintroduced these to really start to massively increase them, there was only about 400 buffalo left in the United States. Most of them were actually here in Utah at Antelope Island. They reintroduced them into Yellowstone, and now their population is so high, they're not only off the endangered and the warning list, they're thriving. There's several thousand that are in Yellowstone. They're really fun. Don't ever honk your car or drive at them because they will come inspect your car. And you can go see videos on YouTube about it. So basically what happens is this rekindles it, but my next one was the second most popular place to restart the population is where?
Antelope Island.
Is Antelope Island, yeah. Antelope Island is a major bison breeding ground to be able to repopulate the United States bison population. Which brings us to the ghost dance. Okay? Now what happens is that the natives want another way to be able to fight back, not just with guns, because it's not working. And they create what is known as the ghost dance. What you need to do for your notes is if you will highlight that this was a dance, so that's the word I would highlight, is a dance, and it created cross-cultural unity. Basically, multiple Native American tribes at the same time doing the same exact dance. Basically, what the goal of this dance was and what you need to highlight, this guy named Wovoka, by the way, that's his name, okay, he's going to be in the Sioux. He is going to begin this dance and creates it because this is what it does. If you will highlight, it invokes spirits of their ancestors as a force against white expansion. Basically, while doing this dance, you're able to communicate with your ancestors. They are then able to help you, and they are able to get you where you need to be able to defeat this white expansionism. The idea, too, is that the more you did this dance, the more likely that you would be to be able to get rid of white expansion in the United States. Now, what happens is that this dance is an intense dance. It's like 3 days of chanting, 3 days of movement, and it's pretty intimidating. Unfortunately, for the natives, this is what they didn't expect. While, yes, they were communing with their ancestors, and yes, they were asking for help, the military doesn't see it as that. Instead, and what you need to highlight on your next bullet, is if you will highlight scares the military and the federal government. They see this as a revolution. These people are invigorating people. These people are going to start a riot. They're going to try to overtake people. Who knows what they're going to do? And people begin to get scared. Unfortunately, this is what's going to bring a very awful end to the Indian Wars. You see, what happens is that there is this small tribe, or part of the Sioux Natives, that they are going to be doing this ghost dance. The U.S. military sees it, they're scared of it, and they order that all the natives have to relinquish their weapons and give them up. They take everybody's weapons, guns, knives, things like that. They put them in a giant pile. They set them on fire. According to the legend, what happens is that one native is deaf. They go up to him, they tell him to give back his gun. He can't hear them. So they grab his gun from his hands. He doesn't know what's going on. A struggle ensues, and a shot goes off. The U.S. military sees that as a sign of war, and they begin to shoot, and in 40 minutes, massacre everybody in that small clan. A couple of hundred people. Now what happens is that this basically, and what you need to know, so on your back up to where it says the Indian Wars, if you will highlight the Battle of Wounded Knee, that's what this is called. If you ever heard of the book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, that's what this is in reference to. And if you will also do like a little arrow from that, and write that this is going to be the end of the Indian Wars. And really what this becomes is the end of the major conflict. You see, now at this point, the native tribes are just done. Emotionally, physically, mentally. We've done everything we could for hundreds of years to stop this expansionism, and it's never going to stop. What happens is that this event, with all these people who died in the middle of winter, is really going to become an effective end to the conflict, simply because the natives give up. They say there's nothing more we can do. If we continue to fight, this is just going to happen over and over and over again. And Wounded Knee pretty much becomes the last major event of the Indian Wars. Now, if you kind of want another example of how they really kind of stuck it to the Native Americans, you might have heard of this show called the Buffalo Bills Wild West show. If you've ever heard of Annie Oakley, she was a performer during the show. They would basically travel, everyone loved the Old West, they would travel around and they would do this whole show about the Wild West. And people loved it, people went to it. Fun fact, by the way, this is a fresh off the newspaper from yesterday. If you ever heard of a place called Hurricane down next to St. George, they are doing a proposal right now for $3 billion to build a Wild West Disneyland, a huge theme park all about the Wild West. So maybe in the next couple of years, you guys can go down and watch a Wild West show. I think it'd be fun. Because it's right outside of St. George, and it has a lot of land that they can buy for cheap. Same reason why Disneyland is in Anaheim and not LA. So here's what happens at this show, though. You see, all of these native leaders during the Indian Wars get arrested, right? You committed treason. You committed war acts. They end up executing several of them because of this, for committing these acts of crime against the United States. But they had another solution. You see, when they went to go arrest these people for the people they didn't execute, they could A, put them in jail, or B, they could humiliate them. So what happened is that they would have these native leaders put into the Wild West show, and this was your present sentence. Which means that every night, when they performed this show, they would do a reenactment of the Indian Wars. And every time, you would lose. If you want to kind of understand the impact of why this would be, I want you to picture in your head, let's pretend that you are in sports, and this is like the state championship game, and you lose, and then every single night, you're forced to reenact you losing. Except now, instead of just losing a game, you're losing your tribe, your culture, your brothers and your sisters, and you relive that and reenact it every night. And not just that, there's no protection for these natives, which means when they walk into the stadium, they have rocks thrown at them. They have drinks poured on them. They're spit at. People throw tomatoes at them. After the end of the show, when they go back to their houses, they get beat up. Sometimes they get shot. Basically, that's what your sentence is this humiliation. So it really kind of becomes the last stick-it to these native tribes. Yes?
People that are coming to see this show, don't they get bored of seeing the same thing over and over again?
Well, it's a traveling show. So it's kind of like, if you think about how Broadway goes on tour, or like a circus goes on tour. That's basically how it works. Now the reality is, though, is that people love this, and even when it comes back in a couple years, you'd go and take your kids to it. It was a really, really popular thing that you would go and see. It's kind of like the same reason why people go see the Nutcracker every single year. It's something that's like tradition. And it was this fascination with the Old West and these cowboys and just this excitement. Yeah?
I have a street pass. Can I go?
Yeah, you should probably come show it to me. Next time, just let me know at the beginning of class. That's usually the easiest way to be able to do it. Yeah, Marie?
I don't understand. So if the chiefs are in trouble, why did they have the rest of their tribe do it?
Do this?
Yeah.
Well, it was mostly chiefs.
Oh.
So it's mostly going to be the chiefs, the generals, the higher ranked people in your class, or not in your class, excuse me, in your tribe. That's going to be the majority of this. One other thing that happens too is after the Indian Wars, when they have lost pretty much everything in their entire economy, a lot of the tribesmen, this is the only job they can get. And so some actually join this in an attempt to just be able to survive and provide for their families. More questions about this? Now, what happens following this is we're now going to enter the new period of how we're going to deal with natives. If you will bracket from where it says grants peace policy, all the way down to assimilation, and if you will write next to that, new native policies. And a lot of these are very similar to what we have today. This kind of begins the new start of how we're going to deal with natives. Now, hopefully you guys remember a guy named Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? You might have remembered him. He was a Union general in the Civil War, becomes the president. Do you guys remember the story about how the president, he was eating a peach, realized that he had throat cancer. He writes a memoir to help his wife's spending habits. Do you guys remember this story?
Yeah.
If you know, you might not have been here, or maybe you just weren't paying attention. I don't know. Anyways, so Ulysses S. Grant is going to be the president during these Indian Wars. And he begins to advocate for two things. So what you need to have next to Grant's peace policy, if you will highlight first on the second bullet where it says reservations. He basically is going to create the modern day reservation system. Now, basically this is going to massively reduce the amount of land that these natives are going to get. Now, the other thing that he is going to advocate for is what is known as assimilation, if you'll go ahead and highlight that. Now, in terms of reservations, here is what they are going to say in terms of the reservation system. So this is Grant of why this is justified. So it says, the building of railroads and the access thereby, given to all the agricultural and mining regions of the country, is rapidly bringing civilized settlements into contact with all the tribes of Indians. What does this sound similar to that we learned in the past? Does anybody remember we read a sourcing? It was Trail of Tears. Okay, so if you remember, that's what they said about the Trail of Tears. This is justified because civilization is coming into contact with these native tribes. It then says, I see no remedy for this except in placing all the Indians on large reservations and giving them absolute protection there. The idea basically was if you go on a reservation, you're going to be protected. Now, it's kind of a backwards idea here because it's like, if you put you into this little corner, you're going to be fine. Imagine, for example, that we had somebody in this class who was just like a total bully. And every single day he came up to you or she came up to you and was like, you suck. And it really hurt your feelings. Okay? And what if, no, don't practice it. That's not saying it's real. Okay? But let's pretend, okay, listen. Let's pretend that that is what we're doing. Okay? But our solution to solve your problem, let's say that you're the individual that's being bullied all the time. Instead of addressing the bully, we take you and we place you in the corner around like, when we put you like in a little cage, we say, you stay in here and nobody will bother you. Okay? That's the idea of this right here. We're going to put you in this area and nobody else will bother you. Now, the other thing that he does is what is known as assimilation. And if you will go down to the very bottom where it says assimilation, if you will like double star this, it's a very important term. Now, a few class periods ago, we watched a video where, if you remember, there was this guy that was on a candid camera show, and he went into an elevator. Do you guys remember that show?
Yeah.
Okay. When he went into the elevator and other people started doing things, what did he do? He copied them, right? It's the idea that you have peer pressure. You want to become like everybody else. Assimilation is the idea that these natives are going to be put into the white culture. And instead of keeping their own culture, they are going to begin to morph it and change it into the white culture. It's basically the idea of moving a native into a white culture. Now, the way that they're going to do that is two different ways. The first one is what is known as the Dawes Surveillance Act, and this is a double-star term for this. Basically means a separation act. Now what happens is that the Dawes Surveillance Act is going to become the major legislative act for this time period. So things that it does, number one, if you want to put a number one next to it, this is going to terminate tribal ownership of most reservation land. It is no longer Sioux land, it is now the government's land. Then two, it's going to allocate parcels to individuals outside the reservation. Reason why is it's going to encourage people to leave the reservation. If you leave the reservation, then you can get this land that's actually yours, but you're not allowed to be in your culture anymore. That's kind of the idea here. But one of the biggest things that's going to happen and what we're going to focus on for the next couple of minutes. Oh, by the way, if you want to see a really interesting thing about reservations, this up here is going to be in 1819. So in 1819, this is the original Native American land, everything in color. This is by 1892. So you can see the massive reduction in land. This is today's reservation system in the United States. Hugely reduced land from the original population. Now that brings us to the best way to assimilate according to the U.S. government. And it's going to be a really creative way. We're going to talk about the impact of it for just a couple minutes. And that's called the Carlisle Boarding School. So this is a star term. There is a bit of a problem with this, though. And you'll notice that the two bullets are the exact same bullets from the thing before. Which means I screwed up. So if you'll go ahead and cross out those bullets underneath Carlisle Boarding School. And instead, I want you to write down next to Carlisle Boarding School, way to assimilate, ASSIMILATE, Native children. So basically, how can we force these Native children to become like a white settler? Now, basically what would happen is when you were a child, you'd be forced to go to these boarding schools across the United States. And they would teach you basically how to be in the white civilization. So if you speak Native Sioux, Native Cherokee, whatever it could be, you now speak English. And they would teach you how to do this. They would basically not allow you to teach your own native language. They would teach you how to speak English. Now, the biggest impact is going to be from photos like this. Now, you'll notice with this photo, this is the before picture. So if you think about before, this is when they arrive. If you notice as well, it says U.S. Army Signal Corps. Basically what that means is that these were schools run by the U.S. military. That was the goal here. So this is before, and then this picture shows 3 months later. Same group of people. Now if you notice too, you'll also notice on their names some things change. Names like having the name Margaret and Humphrey and Beatrice. Are those names, hey guys, it's not really funny, okay? Are those names native names? No, they changed their names to Christian Bible names, okay? Now, we're going to look, and you're going to, just for a few minutes, and then you guys are going to do a lot of this as homework. If you'll please grab out your homework assignment, which is the one from last class. It says Indian Boarding School's Primary Source Activity. Hey, you've missed a little bit. Both of you have. Yeah. So grabbing that paper out for me. Now, in terms of the impact of these boarding schools, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. If you ever say to yourself, why does this matter here in Utah? Carlisle Indian Boarding School was actually all the way in Pennsylvania. We actually had one here in Utah in Brigham City. This is what it looked like. It was actually open until 1972. So these boarding schools did not just end in the Indian Wars. They actually extended, and most of them closed by about the year 1980, but they were present throughout the United States. Now, here's what you're going to do. If you'll first off flip to like the very last pages. That is your actual assignment. The rest are the documents that you're going to be using for that assignment. Now, here's what we are going to do. Okay? We're going to look at document A first. Now, I'm going to put it up on the board as well so you don't have to flip back and forth for at least in class. Now, you have a chart on this paper, and here's what you're going to do for each document. So, for each document, you're going to first in the first box do this observation. What's something that you're noticing? What's something you're seeing in this document? What is something you're identifying as happening in this document? The second one is reflect. This is your feeling section. Why is this being done? What is happening? What is the impact? Yep. Okay. What's the impact of everything that's going on? Okay. By the way, did you get my message on Remind?
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Give it to me. Thank you. And the last one is if you were to question somebody in that document and ask them something, what would you ask? Okay? So here's what you're going to do. This is your first document. This is Doc A. So you don't have to flip back and forth if you don't want to because I have it up on the board. So this is your first document. To Captain R.H. Pratt, the superintendent of this school, is due the credit of conceiving and, so far as possible, of carrying out the idea that the most effectual way of getting civilization into the Indian is to get the Indian into civilization. Based on this document, I want you to go ahead and fill out that chart for document A. It's only about 6 or 7 words. It's not expansive. Just show for me what does this mean. So go ahead and fill out your chart. Ayush, you doing right?
Yeah, I'm just tired.
I'm sorry, me too. Make sure all 3 boxes get filled out. It's also document A, which is on the first page of your whole packet. So this is basically what you're going to be doing for part 1 of your homework. There's actually 2 homework assignments tonight. This is the first one. It'll take about 20 minutes to complete, so it's not expansive. Okay. If you put at the front of this packet, do next class period. Because if you put it behind, you're going to have a huge assignment next class period for homework, and you don't want to get behind. So you can put this one away. We're kind of a little bit behind, so we don't have a chance to do it as much together. Oh, wait, before you put it away, excuse me, I apologize. Bring it back out. I want you to go ahead and flip this packet to the extremely last page, as in the page that's completely blank. Completely blank page on the very, very back. Then what I want you to do is, at the very top left, you're going to put part 1. Go about 1/3 of the way down and write part 2. And then 1/3 of the way down again and do part 3. So basically separating this into 3 parts. Now what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at a really, really famous picture. You've actually seen this picture, and you probably won't even remember it, okay? But basically, we're going to be looking at this picture, and we're going to be kind of analyzing it. So there's going to be 3 questions for the first 2 parts about this document, okay? So on your paper, you can just do like question 1, 2, and 3 for each one, except the last one, there's only one in the last one. I want you to answer these 3 questions about this half of the painting. So it's specifically put in half for a reason. So the first question is, what are 3 things you're noticing? So think terms, objects, things that you're noticing in this picture. The second one, what colors are being used in this picture? Think lights and darks. What kind of symbols is it showing? And then last one, what is this random thing, do you think? If you were to guess, what could this random person be? Okay? So go ahead and fill out those questions on your piece of paper. And it's supposed to say 1, 2, and 3. Sorry, it says 1, 1, 1. Yeah.
And that should be for part 1, part 2, and part 3, or is this all?
It's all part 1.
Okay.
This is all part 1 because this is the first part of the painting.
Oh.
So I'm writing all 3 questions, answering all 3 questions. All right, raising your hand, what are a couple things that we're noticing in this image? Raising your hand, volunteers.
I noticed that there's a lot of ways of transportation. They're showing boats, railroads, horses.
Okay, so think about that. What term would be different new modes of transportation and technology? What's a key term that we can use? Second Industrial Revolution, right? So we're having all these different new forms of technology, people being able to move west, different movements west. Okay, what else are we noticing?
There are farmers, they look like they're plowing new land and making, settling.
And there was a term that we learned last class where people got free land to go farm. What term was that? Homestead. Yep. And if other people other than these 3 people over here could answer, that would be great, aka that side of the room. Okay? All right, so we have the Homestead Act. Also, if you're the steel plow group from before, here's your steel plow in the image. Okay? What else? Yeah?
There's the giant lady, I guess it's a lady.
Okay, there's a giant something marching along. She's holding something. What is she holding? Telegraph lines, yep. Telephone doesn't exist at this point. So it's a telegraph line that's going to be moving. Okay, one other thing as well. Over here, what is this?
Rivers and
It's specifically a specific city that looks like this. May know? It is New York. Okay? It's New York City because you can tell this is actually Manhattan right here. This is the Brooklyn Bridge. What about colors? Is this a very dark or bright part of the image?
Bright.
It's bright, right? Bright, sunny, different things like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to switch to the opposite side. So this is part 2. So you have 3 more questions you're going to answer for the second half of this image. Make sure you do your homework at home. Okay, so here's the second half. All right. So now, first question, what's 3 things you're noticing in this half of the image? What colors are used in this half? And then how is this different? Do you say, is it the ocean? Because this sure looks like water to me. Whoever said he was wrong. Okay. Alright. Almost done. I like that you pulled out your glasses though to see this. That's very studious. Alright, Kay, raising your hands, things that we're noticing. Especially from those sides. Yeah.
They're kind of marching into like kind of representing untamed forces, dark and menacing.
Okay, so this is this kind of weird, odd territory that they're moving over into. Ella?
Floating wagons, so the technology of trains hasn't got that far yet.
Okay, so we have the older technology over here in the west. What else? There's a ton in here. Yeah.
It looks like it almost got burned down.
Okay, so it looks like it's kind of been destroyed, possibly.
There's I think it's a bear in the bottom left.
There is a bear in the barn.
Running away.
Yep. You have a bear here. You have buffalo here. They're all running away. Also, there's a dog over here. Yes.
It kind of looks like the settlers are bringing the light of technology into the natives' lives, but they're sort of just pushing them out.
Okay, so they're bringing this light that we know is going to be over here in a second. They're pushing it out. Josh, you said something earlier. What'd you say?
It's the ocean.
It is the ocean over here. The Pacific Ocean over here on the left. And remember, so we have East Coast to the West Coast.
How do you know it's not the Great Salt Lake?
Because I know it's not the Great Salt Lake. I know this image. Liza. Okay. So now what we're going to do, there's three more things I want to point out real quick, okay? First off, right here, that does represent the Rocky Mountains, okay? If you notice over here too, you have these white things. What are these white things, you think?
Gold.
Silver.
What is this?
No.
It's a dead buffalo. Buffalo carcasses being left, okay? If you notice all these natives kind of being pushed out and things like that, and then if you look, dark, gloomy clouds at the top. So now what I want you to do is this is the full image, okay? So this is all put together. This is an image called American Progress, extremely, extremely famous image. What I want you to think is based on everything put together, and everybody's going to interpret this differently, which is fine. I want you to think, according to this picture, what is your definition of American Progress? So this is the name of the whole painting, is American Progress. There's two very different sides. Is American Progress good? Is it bad? The creator of this, John Gass, said that he would never tell people the true meaning, so we don't know what his true meaning is. But now I want you to think, what is your true meaning of how you think he's describing American Progress? Do it in 2 sentences. Okay. Now you can put this one away, because this kind of is your in-class assignment. So you go ahead and put this away. Grab out your notes again. Stay on the second page, because in that big empty space, I want you to write down the name of this source. Okay? So this is American Progress. That's what you put in your little quotation marks. And it's also by John Gast, John space Gast, John Gast, that's his name. And then go ahead and flip this packet to the next section. All right. Now, as we start this next section, which we only have 18 minutes for, which is a super short amount of time, because we have to be ready for next class, because here's my little excitement, and I'm most excited about this class for next class. Here's the reason why. Next class, at the beginning of class, we're going to be doing a really fun activity. Like, in my opinion, one of my favorite activities that we do in A-Push. However, it requires energy. And some of you in this class are really overly energetic and hyper every day. So this is going to be like your class's thing. Now here's my little warning. This activity really either is going to be great or boring depending on you guys. I've had classes where it's like super, super fun and exciting. And I've had other classes where it's super dull and boring. It's all about your energy level. So if you need to eat like a piece of candy beforehand, listen to like your pump-up songs or like your Britney Spears playlist before you come, something to get you really pumped so that you can be hyper when you come to class. So next class is a good day to be hyper. Sound good? I'm actually encouraging you to be energetic. Okay, great. Now, before we start this though, I want to point out something. It's about the AP College Board, which is great. Please don't tell them I said anything negatively about them. Now, the College Board kind of does whatever they want on the AP exam, right? They can pick whatever topics and things like that. We talked about before how there's 4 different forms in the AP exam. The major one, 85% of students get. That's Form A. That's the one where we say last year's DBQ was this. It's based on 85% of the students doing it. There's Form B, which if you for some reason missed the AP exam, that's your makeup exam. And then there's a Form M, and that's the scary one. Form M is basically how they prove that the test is valid. And they randomly will select schools, they'll put the test in, and it tests whether or not that school is being honest, if there's cheating involved, and things like that. It is traditionally seen as a harder test. That's what most people say about it. Last year, Skyline was chosen. And Skyline had about 25% of their students do Form M. Now, here's the thing about that. Big Form A, 85% of students take it, encompassed last year what's called imperialism, and it encompassed about 50 years of American history. The Form M DBQ, which is worth 35-ish% of your grade, is on the next 15 minutes of class. Which means the next 15 minutes of class could have been last year your biggest grade on the entire AP exam. So you never know what's going to be on the AP exam. It could be a 5-minute thing. It could be a 3-day thing. So just be prepared for that. It's going to be super fun. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and start. So really important to be able to know. This is actually a really important section. They ask about it all the time on the AP exam. Now, if you will put at the top of this paper, HC for historical context. And if you will put, for your context, economic decline, and then in parentheses, put panics, as in capital P-A-N-I-C-S, of 1863, 1873, and 1893. 1883 was a good year. Yeah. Now what happens basically is that this whole page is contextualized through economic despair and troubles. Basically what happens is that in these periods there's a huge economic panic and decline. Massive economic problems in the United States. Now if you see from this image right here, you have Uncle Sam, so America. You can see that hard times are going to come in 1893, which is going to be kind of like the final Kickstarter of the populist movement. Over here, you can see that they've already killed 73 and 63 over here, saying that they've defeated those, and they're just going to put another pelt on their wall. It's the idea that Uncle Sam has to be able to get through this. Well, the problem is in economic depressions and recessions, one of the hardest hit is going to be the farmers. And at the top of this paper, if you'll write the word farmers and then highlight it or star it, this entire page has to do with farmers. Now what happens is that these farmers are going to begin to get hit. And they want to kind of ally with each other and help each other out. Now, this begins through what is known as the Farmers Alliance. This is kind of the first one, a group that gets together to help each other out. If you will highlight on this, solve debt issues. Solve debt issues. Now, basically what happens is they want to solve these debts for these farmers. So they begin to work together. They create like an insurance corporation. They help with mortgages and different things like that. And their main political platform, so if you want to put next to the farmers' platform, this is kind of like a political platform. Basically, this is what they believe should be done about the U.S. economy. Now, if you will highlight in the first bullet, have federal government limit corporate power. And above that, we're going to put the term Gilded Age. So basically, whoa, that was weird. Did you guys see that? It had like a little arrow that was going across it. I don't know how I did that. Can I do it again? Ooh. Okay. Anyways, so what happens is that basically the Gilded Age occurs. The corporations have too much power. In particular, the corporation you need to know about and underline is the word railroad. The railroads control the prices of this time. What if you had a crop that only sells for 20 cents at market and you had to pay 50 cents to ship it? Basically, the railroads control the prices, and they're beginning to bear down on them. So now they want government to step in and say, stop, you need to limit the corporate power. The other thing is, if you will highlight low interest loans. Make it cheaper for farmers to be able to get things that they need to farm in the United States. And then finally, if you will also highlight the word currency, and we'll talk about that a little bit later because it's really important. Now, all of this transforms into what is known as the Populist Party, which is a double star. It is on basically every AP exam, as in it's a must study for the AP exam. It's on almost every single AP exam. Is the Populist Party. If you also want to put next to the Populist Party, it is usually considered one of the most successful minor parties. When we compare minor parties in the United States, Populist Party is definitely one of the most influential and successful out of all of them. Now, here's basically what's going to be. If you will highlight cause, the growth of corporate power. The growth of corporate power. Basically, again, it's just like we talked about before. Corporate power increases, Gilded Age increases. Now we need to be able to change it. The people who are going to form this, if you'll put number 1 next to the Knights of Labor, which makes sense, it's the labor union. And then if you'll put number 2, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And we'll talk about that next class of why they wanted the temperance union. Remember, temperance is against what? Alcohol. Major reason, the farmers, lots of alcohol, access to alcohol, get rid of alcohol, they make more money. That's why it's temperance. Now, star the next bullet where it says supporters. You absolutely must know the supporters are going to be the farmers. That's the really important one that you need to know. The farmers are going to be the supporters here. If you guess anything else, you are definitely wrong. Now, if you notice, they are going to be from the South and the West. Based on what we've learned about before, does that mean they're going to be more Democratic or Republican? Democratic, and if you'll write that next to it. They are basically a splinter party from the Democrats. Now, this ideology bullet is a starred bullet. Ideology is a starred bullet. You need to know, what did the populists believe? So, if you will highlight in the first bullet, stronger federal government role in the U.S. economy. If you will then highlight in the second bullet, currency, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then in the last bullet, if you will highlight, public government ownership of railroads. So this is the basis of the Populist Party. What did they believe? We're going to have you highlight one more because I don't want to have to come back to this slide. If you will also highlight William Jennings Bryan. So here's basically what is going to happen with the Populist Party. They believe that the farmers, the common man, can be able to help out the U.S. economy. And they are going to attempt to be able to change it. Now, what happens is this image kind of describes for you why this was happening. This is your contextualization. So if you notice, you have over here lies prosperity, so money, enslaved in 63, stabbed in the back in 73, assassinated in 93. So you can tell how they're talking about these different economic panics. Based on what we know then, who do you think this person represents?
Farmers.
It's the farmers, okay? Weighed down by what? Debt, okay? And if you notice he has this farm over here, it says the word mortgage. That means that farm was foreclosed. If it's foreclosed, what does that mean happened to it? Bank took it back, right? They lost their house. So this basically is kind of showing the plight of the farmers. Now what happens is that they have this idea, and it becomes what they're famous for, and this is a starred term. Go ahead and star the first bullet. And if you will highlight, replace all coinage with silver. And circle the word silver. Silver is very important when it comes to the Populist Party. So here's basically what's going to happen. Before the New Deal, we had this thing called the gold standard. That meant for every single dollar that was in the U.S. government that we spent, we had to have that exact amount in gold. It's the idea of basically backing your money and not buying things on credit. Well, here's the thing about this. Gold was hard to come by. We know this from the gold rush. It was extremely expensive. Why are we backing our money with gold that we can't even have ourselves? We have to import it from another country when we have all over the United States. What are we going to have all over the United States, especially in Utah and Idaho? Silver. Okay? We are going to have massive, massive amounts of silver. It's why Park City was basically created, was because of the silver mines. So what happens is, why would we back this up with gold that we don't have, when instead we can have it with silver? So who would support this idea? If you'll put a number 1 next to the silver miners, this gives them a job. Put a number 2 next to farmers who thought this would resolve their debts. Put a bunch of money into the economy. Everybody has money. You're good to go. Okay? I would encourage you not to put your stuff away, by the way, so you can continue to listen. Okay, I'm just letting you know, because you still have 7 minutes left. And then number 3 is going to be the debtors, who again, if you add more money into the economy, easier to pay off your debts. So basically what happens is the free silver movement takes over the United States. People begin to say that the small town person can be saved by the silver. So I want you to notice in this picture, political cartoons are huge during populism, by the way. You have these 3 guys with long beards and these hats. Who do you think they represent?
Harry, Curly, and Moe.
Who would stereotypically look like this?
Very wealthy.
Miners.
Farmers. This is the first class not to get that, but that's okay. We'll get the next one. So these guys represent the... Hey, listen. They represent the farmers of the United States, okay? So this right here is the monster of the free silver movement. Over here, you have the U.S. Treasury, and he has a sword that says sound money policy. Is this image pro or anti-populist?
Anti-populist.
Anti-populist, right? Because they are going to be anti-against this. He's going to cut off the heads of these right here. Now, one very, very important thing that you need to put down as an identifier of how you know that this is a populist one if you forget the word silver. If you would put next to free silver movement, 16, the number 16, ... as in a colon, 1 ratio. 16 to 1 ratio. Now here's basically what happens. Because silver is not worth as much as gold, you would have to put in 16 pieces of silver into the U.S. economy to be able to make up for your 1 piece of gold. So that becomes a 16 to 1 ratio. Put in 16 pieces for 1 piece of gold. If you notice on the neck here, you actually have 16 pieces of silver, and it says 16 to 1. If you ever see the term 16 to 1 on any political cartoon, you know it's going to be a populist cartoon. Now, if you see on this one, you have the Democrats right here. It's broken off from the Democrats from this Free Silver Party. It says a downhill movement. Is this pro or anti-populist? Anti, right? Basically going all over the place. Now, if you notice in this one, this is kind of showing you a little bit of the end here. What do you think happens? Does this movement succeed? No. You can tell because you can see that the gold standard right here is going to defeat the silver standard. Do you guys see 16-1 right here?
Yep.
Always that indicator saying that this is going to be populism. Now, what happens basically is people feel that if you add all this money into the economy, it's just going to cause massive amounts of inflation. If you add everything, which you can see right here, it's literally opening up the floodgates of silver. Adding all this money in is not going to help it. That's why when people are in economic recession, they say, why don't you just print more money, Treasury? Print more money, people get money, everything's fixed. Causes inflation. Ask the South during the Civil War. Now what happens is that this is going to fail. But they're going to have a leader named William Jennings Bryan. If you will star this term, and if you will put next to him, he is the leader of the populists. Now, William Jennings Bryan is become very famous for the populist movement. He basically becomes the face of the populists. Now, basically, this is because he's a really great speaker. He knows how to be able to convince people of his way. Now, what happens is that he is going to create this thing called the Cross of Gold speech. If you will go ahead and star this term, the Cross of Gold speech is going to be what makes the populist movement what it's known today. Now, what happens is that he does this speech. And he basically has, and we don't have time, so we're just going to read this bottom part. It says, "You shall not press down on the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold." Basically what he's saying is you cannot press down this idea of the gold standard. Now if you notice, hey, don't put your stuff away. Wait a second. Okay? So, cross of gold and crucifying. What is that giving imagery of? Jesus Christ, right? So basically, if you go with the gold standard, you are crucifying, just like Jesus Christ, the U.S. economy. Now, if you'll grab out your other homework assignment that you picked up today, I have to quickly explain it, because we're almost out of time. This is due next class as well. This should take you about 10 minutes. It's pretty short. At the top of this paper, go ahead and flip it to the back, excuse me. At the top of this paper, please go ahead and star that very top bolded step 1. A lot of people forget it. So the very top, star it. Make sure you don't forget to do it. Okay? You're going to be analyzing this cartoon of populism. Now, if you'll make sure you're looking on the back here, basically what you're going to do is you're going to analyze this in 4 different parts. You're going to say, what's the contextualization of this? Think economic panics, Gilded Age. Do it just like in a historical context for an essay. On the second one is intended audience. Who do you think this is trying to convince, or who are they trying to talk to? The first P is going to be purpose. What's the purpose of this document? And what's the point of view of this document? You need to do this in a minimum of 4 sentences each. 4 sentences each, if you want to put that at the top. The first sentence is an introduction, so it's really intro sentence and then 3 other things. You can double dip, so if you're using a term in one, don't feel like you don't have to use it in the other. Okay? Alright, we got like 10 seconds left, so you can put your stuff away.